Now, this headline in the Mail, Daily Mail, on Monday, the 1st of March 2021, this headline could fit a report, an original report about Shamima Begum, because she has been denied justice. All right? But of course, this is not anything to do with Shamima Begum, really, and her being denied justice in the ruling published by the Supreme Court in the UK on Friday, the 26th of February 2021. This is part 2 or part B of the Khoodeelaar campaign, World Exclusive Diagnosis of Fleet Street. Now, this is about Shamima Begum, this Daily Mail. Look at the Daily Mail. Despite the fact that this headline has nothing to do with the actual ruling by the Supreme Court, but it has everything to do with the narrative, the agenda that affects the decision of the court system, the court bureaucracies. And the court bureaucracies in Britain, as embodied, typified by the English jurisdiction, because the English jurisdiction is the one that actually dominates the UK legal bureaucracies. First of all, the Ministry of Justice is nothing of the sort. The Ministry of Justice is a bureaucratic device. It is an obstruction to justice. It's a standing obstruction to justice. And we shall come to a bit more on that in this part. This is part B of the KhoodeelaarTV campaign, KhoodeelaarTV Channel, broadcast in association with a number of campaigns, active campaigns, including the latest one on the list, which is End Hunger at Root. Now, End Hunger at Root is something that goes back to the campaign I actually presented on Channel 4. There used to be a slot, literally a slot called slot, following the 7 o'clock news. 7 o'clock news on Channel 4, the main news. And the slot at the beginning was mainly dedicated to or given to political activists or political kind of campaigners. And I presented several of those, and I wrote them and I presented them. The details of the circumstances in which I had to write them, like standing on my kind of feet in the studio, I shall account in a later broadcast or broadcasts. And that one that I presented, I have mentioned before, not today, but in previous publications and statements and broadcasts. That was in January. That was in January 1992. And the theme that I chose was the role of the United Nations, because in that week, the then British Prime Minister, John Major, was due to address the United Nations General Assembly in the bureaucratic capacity of the UK, having the turn to chair the General Assembly that year. And Major was about to go to the United Nations. So I wrote the broadcast very fast, standing in the studio, as I said. And I did that to make very clear to the audience, to the world, whoever, and the item was dedicated to the contextual irrelevance or lack of engagement by the UK regime at the time with the reality. Because Major, I knew, was going to speak about the need to limit nuclear proliferation, nuclear warfare proliferation, nuclear weapons proliferation, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And I always want an end to the nuclear warfare and nuclear materials and nuclear war kind of preparations to be ended totally. And the whole array, the whole arsenal of nuclear weapons possessed by the nuclear powered states to be decommissioned and appropriate urgent action taken to decommission and make them safe. But on that occasion, at that time, there was no chance whatsoever that John Major's call would be heeded by anyone. And I shall come to that shortly, why that would not be heeded and why no action would be taken. First of all, the reason for John Major's choosing to speak about the need to end nuclear arsenal materials proliferating was not an objective, honest, truthful, genuine kind of purpose or intent. It was aimed at countries in the so-called third world and who had resource-wise less resources than the UK, let's say, who just got loads and loads and loads of nuclear weapons. And that was a politically corrupt kind of bid to kowtow with or collude with the agenda of the bigger, or in terms of resources, stronger nuclear weapon powers to control the access to nuclear weapons by relatively poorer countries. That was the reason. So it wasn't going to be passed as a motion or whatever. It was a stunt being made in collusion with the USA and the others. And that was the reason why I had to put a break to that. And so I broadcast before the General Assembly sat, where John Major did deliver his spiel. And my intervention went wider than John Major's speech for the simple reason that the Channel 4 news and the main contents archived and circulated even at that time in January 1992. And the item is still there and it will be there. And what was original in my slot presentation, which I wrote, as I said, in the studio, Channel 4 studio, standing there, was the fact that millions of people are already, hundreds of millions of people who are in poverty, and hundreds of millions of people wanted to migrate to the Western European countries and North America to avoid poverty and hunger and destitution and starvation. That was also in the news, but nobody was taking any action to deal with that, to stop that. And the immediate response, emotional response, remember, we are talking about January 1992, so just 29 years ago, is it? And the kind of right-wing, anti-Muslim, anti-Muslim, pro-racist, pro-imperialist rhetoric in mainstream politics that has become kind of more accepted and established now wasn't dominating the political mainstream scenes at that time in 1992, January 1992. But the potential for popular discontent in these Western European countries was very much there and rising. Hostility towards the migrants or would-be migrants. And it was something that was going to challenge and threaten the safety of the people, migrants, would-be migrants, and their rights when they arrived, if they arrived, because there are obstacles, severe series of obstacles in their way to get to the kind of wished for destinations. But the urge, the power, the emotional power, and the impetus and the urgency was there among millions of people in Africa and Asia to leave their countries and to seek settlement in destinations across Western Europe. And that was 7 years after Bob Geldof launched his propaganda stunt called Live Aid in 1985. And when he did that, I wrote my column. I was writing a column, not really a business column or kind of paid for column. I wasn't getting paid for writing or researching the thing, but I was writing a column which the editor of the title at the time said to me was the biggest selling point of his publication, which is called the West Indian World. In 1985, there was no Asian title. And even if there were, they would not have the courage to run my column anyway. They still don't. So I wrote the weekly column, and in that I denounced Bob Geldof immediately during the week of his launch. And my denunciation were fact-based. Nobody else wrote anything critical about Bob Geldof. I was the only one that wrote that, and I have been vindicated time and again. But 7 years later, I wrote and presented this 3-minute slot on Channel 4, which is done within the hour of the Channel 4 news at 7 o'clock. And in that, I said that instead of addressing the other things about nuclear or whatever, John Major should concentrate on concrete action being taken by the Western states to deal with, address, and solve the main problem of hunger and starvation. Now that remains to this day. Nearly 30 years later, the only such call, well, there have been murmurs by others, but nothing like as clear and as consistent, as coherent that I wrote and presented, and I have been arguing the same lines for years. I said that if the Western countries wanted to solve the problem that will get worse in years to come, I said in 1992, then they must solve the problem of hunger and poverty and lack of democracy in the countries of origins of the migrants. If they don't, then there will be uncontrollable, I said 29 years ago, uncontrollable movement by people wanting to come to the Western European countries and the Western countries, which is what is happening. And to this day, none of the prime ministers, including, of course, Tony Blair and others who have followed John Major, who was the immediate direct target of my presentation and my argument and my program on Channel 4 television. None of the prime ministers has done anything to implement what I said and what remains the best solution to the issue, to the need for people, poor people, people pushed in poverty, hunger, destitution, and genocide across the 2 continents. So, when I say anything like that, what I've just said, I say that with the fullest possible awareness of the possibility that everything I say will be checked, fact-checked by all kinds of people, which is absolutely fine. And I also know that this kind of argument, which is scientifically, economically, socially, and racially, and legally, absolutely overdue for implementation. And yet, throughout the whole world, the Western European mainstream, and Free State, of course, they are pretending to be deaf to this and to be blind to the obvious arguments that I create, an argument that I present. So, the Daily Mail today is saying, justice in retreat. As I have been saying, the Daily Mail is probably the most persistent lying part of the Free State. There is no justice in Britain. There is no justice in the British Constitution. For example, last week's boasts by Matt Hancock, the so-called Secretary of State at the expense of health. Remember what I'm saying, at the expense of health. I'm not calling him Health Secretary because he is there in that post with that name, but he is doing damage to the cause of health service. But his boast that he has broken the law and he will break the law in the future exposes naked boast that a member of the so-called cabinet is boasting that he knows that he has broken the law, but he is also determined to break the law in the future. Now that makes it worse than a banana republic. And today's papers have continued to have contradictory messages from Johnson. Johnson says that there is a Brazilian variant of the virus, which is more resistant to drugs, vaccine, whatever. And then he says that although it is strong and dangerous, more dangerous, he is going to relax the lockdown. Now, you cannot be more contradictory, more clearly contradictory and careless and callous. And this is the mentality of the Brazilian dictator and fascist and racist. And it seems that Boris Johnson is prone, that is to say, he has a weakness, he has a predisposition, an existing readiness to accept anything a right-winger and a fascist says or does, like he did with the Trump. And so therefore what he's saying is that despite all the hundreds, well, it's the death, the number of people died, who have died or have been allowed to die, or who have been neglected to die of the virus is over 100,000, no matter who gives the statistics or data. After all these deaths, which are way above the numbers of people who were killed during the Second European War. It's not a world war, it was a Second European War, but we shall leave that particular sophisticated definition and distinction aside for the time being. So Trump neglected hundreds of thousands of people in America to be killed, to be left neglected, to be killed, to die. And Boris Johnson is doing this again. So when he is relaxing the lockdown, he's also admitting, he's doing that by admitting that the lockdown is not advisable. Sorry, the removal or the relaxing of the lockdown or the removing of the higher tier lockdown is not justified scientifically, not justified on the evidence that he is admitting in the same breath. So when the former French ambassador in the UK tells the Times newspaper that, of course, Boris Johnson is a congenital liar, that is not an issue, widely known. But it is not just his congenital propensity to lie, but it is his unfitness for purpose. How can a so-called prime minister say in the same speech that he knows that the society is still far away from being safe from the virus, from whatever measures are in place? He knows also that there is an import, an additional emergency import of a very dangerous strain of the virus, which is being called the Brazilian virus. And then he says, but still he's going to let the schools return, and he's going to say that the lockdown will be relaxed. Now that's the prime minister. Prime minister, whatever the party, whatever the kind of party political kind of identity. What I'm saying is that where are the media? Where are the free press? Why are they taking the side of those forces? Most of them are right-wing, that want to condemn more people to infection by relaxing the lockdown. Why are they doing that? And that's a sickness in itself. And that is why the word diagnosis and the task diagnosis is the most appropriate one. As I said before, and as the facts show, there are 2 or 3 specialized so-called schools in 3 universities dealing with the media, the conduct of the media, and the behavior of the media. And none of them, the Glasgow University Media School, Cardiff Media Journalism School, and the City University Journalism School, they all are not fit for purpose. That is to say, they are not really studying journalism and the media in this country. They are doing, and the National Council for Training of Journalists, or NCTJ, is not, of course, examining the media, nor is any of the other university, most certainly not the Oxbridge. What I'm saying is something that is not original, because I've said it before, original to us, but not original to this particular part. So the media, because of what Thomas Babington Macaulay boastfully said in the 19th century about the English language, because of empire and the imposition of the English language on so many countries in Africa and Asia. English language titles are wrongly assumed to be superior titles of journalism. And what I am doing is exposing that as a lie. That doesn't mean that the publications from Pretoria or Johannesburg, which is where the English language papers are still dominant, or in other countries in Africa, or in Chennai, which used to be called Madras, or New Delhi, or Mumbai, or Kolkata, the publications published from those cities and locations and addresses are still slavishly aping and following so many of the lies and lying standards and patterns and linguistic kind of stylistic things. And the problem with that is that they are concerned more to read like the London newspapers, English newspapers from England, than they are interested in telling the truth, looking for the truth in their own countries or regions or neighborhoods. Reading the English language newspapers published in Africa, published in Asia, not only in the subcontinent, but other parts, mainly Southeast Asia, including Malaysia, Singapore, and Hong Kong. It is embarrassing, intellectually and morally embarrassing, because they do not publish original, truthful, investigative report. What I'm saying is that even though they are no longer published by imperialists, the newspapers read like imperialist newspapers, which is a detached location. The publishers and the writers and the columnists are so, again, embarrassingly kind of servile in their cultural subservience to the styles of Fleet Street, that it is very, for me at least, it is very, very unacceptable. And I have been studying all kinds of press for a very long time. And I have been actively studying, if you like. Most of the times, my studies entail my campaigning. As I said, I never wrote for any publication for money. That's my condition. And I didn't have to write anything for money. But apart from that, I chose not to write anything in return for money, which meant that everything I wrote as I saw fit. That is to say, based on the evidence that I found and I looked for. And I have been more prolific. That is to say, my capacity to write is bigger than anybody that I know as my contemporaries. So if I wanted money, or if I wrote for money, I would have made money just by writing, a lot of money. But I have not done that. Now there was in the 1960s, there was the National Union of Journalists that covered both wings of Pakistan. And the Dhaka Union of the National Union of Journalists, the Dhaka branch, had a person whose employer was another title, either the Ittefaq or another of the papers or the Observer. And I didn't write for the Ittefaq, but it was a contemporary paper. But this particular union person was very close to me as a colleague. And we used to have banter, and we used to have kind of jokes at each other's expense. And he noticed that. So when he came, during the 70s, when he came visiting London and he came to Brick Lane, I don't know who he was visiting, but he wasn't visiting me. And there was a meeting held in the Montefiore Center in his kind of recognition of him. And when he saw me, I just went there to attend the meeting, not knowing who would be there. I heard there was a meeting, so I went along. But he saw me and he rushed, literally ran through the crowd and came and shook hands and we embraced. Now he was politically very much different, or he was writing for a very different kind of employer. But he recognized my independence and he always commented on that. And he said, "Why are you writing for these morons?" Whatever the title was that I was writing in. And there were other comments from contemporaries that knew what I was doing and what stand I was taking, which is not at all different from what I've been doing since. While on the plane, on the British Overseas Airways plane on my way to London, I found myself sitting near the window, and the man on my left, a white man, spent the whole journey, whole trip, all the way to London, Heathrow, giving me lists of things that I should not be doing. I didn't know who this man was. And the fact that he did that showed that he was assigned by the state, whoever the state was, as a spy to give me this list of things I shouldn't be doing. And almost everything he said to me I shouldn't be doing, I have been doing. Which is to say that he said that I should not get involved in politics when in Britain. How dare he? That was a racist spying assignment that he was given, obviously. And I have been doing what is rightfully necessary. So, when I told John Major and the audience on Channel 4 in January 1992 that poverty and hunger should be addressed, I wasn't kidding. Nor was I not aware that what I was saying should have been said by the, yes, United Nations, but it wasn't saying that. The United Nations has been, if you like, neutralized in terms of effectiveness and rigor. I mean, even if Doug Hammarskjöld hadn't been murdered in the 1960s, the United Nations bureaucracy would degenerate to where it is now. And the reason is that any kind of careerist group of people, including the police, cannot be trusted as a group of people, as a corporate entity, as a collection of people. They can never be trusted to do the right thing. I mean, this has been the case for thousands of years. And intellectual and moral prophets like Aristotle, Socrates, and Plato. These are the just three examples. So far into the future than all the other people combined could see. So what I'm doing here and this campaign, Diagnosing Fleet Street, is doing the updating of Socrates and Aristotle and Plato and other moral activist philosophers and thinkers. The numbers of such people, by definition, is very small for the simple reason that most of the people in corporate group activities are devoid, lack the foresight, lack the look and the insight. So they are compromised by the organization and they're compromised by the pettiness of their purpose and their aim and their careers. If it wasn't for the events of 1971, I would have been long retired after being a senior diplomat or a civil servant. And if I had done that, none of the things that I've been doing would have been done because I would be limited by the fact that I was part of a professional. I also gave up the opportunity to join the army as a commissioned officer. That was a decision because of my mother sort of being concerned about my welfare. I wasn't responding to her being concerned about my welfare. I was responding to her being concerned and upset. And that is what, and anxious. That is why I didn't become a commissioned military officer. Now, all of these things I'm saying as part of the context of what experience I have that prompts me to say the things that I say, to do the things that I do, which is that I have given up more things that other people would have done a lot to gain. And that is something that is a very long list of things that I keep giving up. And that is part of the cost, that is part of the price that has to be paid in order to tell the truth. And the justification for telling the truth is that it serves the needs of the people who need the truth to be told so that they could get the service, they could get the access, they could get the rights. Right now, it's Shamima Begum, one of them. And I'm saying that the Shamima Begum kind of whole series of things that have happened around her could have been avoided. We are looking at the spectacle of the Labour Party being silent about Shamima Begum. I mean, how horrible. The Labour Party, the party of government waiting to be in place, is completely silent about Shamima Begum. And I include the likes of the fraudulent socialists like Jeremy Corbyn. I am on the record as having said repeatedly, based on evidence, that Jeremy Corbyn is dim. He is intellectually unfit, regardless of the ideology. And that is evident in this whole thing. He has not said anything about Shamima Begum. It's not because he has been crafty or shrewd. It's because he's being stupid. That is the test. That is the kind of case that shows that if the Labour Party were in power and fronted by Jeremy Corbyn, then the quality the quality of government would not have been better than the conservatives. This is not a statement I'm making, without thinking. I'm making it with a lot of thought. And that shows that the country, the so-called many that Jeremy Corbyn was told to kind of mouth, not the few, but the many. The many would be let down and betrayed and not served by a government represented or fronted by the likes of Jeremy Corbyn. This would have been the same case if the crook Neil Kinnock had managed to find himself at number 10 Downing Street after that election that he lost to the Tories. The same thing would have happened. And when I fully agree with the demand that Tony Blair should be tried for crime against humanity and all the other criminality that he has been indulging in and engaging in, I have to say that the package of things that Blair did before he got embroiled in serving the purpose of the warmongers, mainly from the USA and other places that wanted to massacre as many Muslims as they could. Tony Blair could have delivered a number of policies that would have been of lasting significance for the benefit of the cause of the many, actually. But he was wrongly advised and he got derailed. So what I'm saying is that in terms of the capacity to deliver things, Tony Blair, of course, Blair, had the capacity in abundance, intellectual capacity, abundant intellectual capacity as compared to Jeremy Corbyn. And as I have said, it's not as a boast, because I don't have to boast on things like that or things like that. I have been intellectually active for a very long time, and that intellectual activism has necessarily brought me into contacts with people that have always felt uneasy when they compare themselves with me, because they couldn't actually compare themselves with me. That is the thing. So when I say that Jeremy Corbyn in 1981 or 82 told me that he wished he could speak like me at public gathering, which is what happened in the Altavali Park, it wasn't the first time that a leading left activist in Britain had said that to me. 5 years earlier, Ken Lying Still Livingstone in 1977 said exactly the same thing to me after a meeting where I spoke and he spoke, held at the Wandsworth Town Hall in Tooting. So I know from personal experience and engagement, if you like, that these left personalities do not equal to intellectual height or capacities. But I'm only doing this because I was not brainwashed. My education has been against brainwashing right from the beginning, starting with my first teacher, which is my mother. My mother taught me to not accept lies and liars. That's the main teaching. And What has happened in the East End of London following the campaign that we successfully did after the racists murdered Al-Tabali is that intruders and criminals surfaced in the community by using the disguise of looking like us and coming from the same background, that is to say, coming from Silot and Bangladesh. And these are actually engaged currently and have been engaged for the last 30 years or so in sabotaging the defense of the community work that I have been organizing, and others, quite a few others have been engaged in, but they have been gradually kind of detached and made to be disengaged from those activities. And in the context of Shamima Begum and the other three girls that have been betrayed very seriously by the local council and the local elected kind of politicians, we're going to look back at the last 30 years and what happened to the impetus, to the euphoria, and to the awareness level that we created against racism and for our community in the years that followed Al-Tabali's murder. We say Al-Tabali's to include, of course, the murder of Ishaq Ali. Few months later, that is July, Ishaq Ali was murdered in July. And also include the murder by racists of Tosir Ali. Tosir Ali was murdered just 8 years or 7 years previous to 78 when Al-Tabali was murdered. So what I'm going to do is to ask people who were present in the months and in the few years after Al-Tabali, Ishaq Ali was murdered. We won't go into Tosir Ali because Tosir Ali was murdered before 1971. So therefore the kind of organization of the campaign was less coherent, let's put it this way. But there was a campaign, and I shall come to specifically detail that and update on the campaign and awareness that was organized after Tosir Ali was murdered. But in this part, let's say that the reason why Shamima Begum and the three other girls were neglected had nothing to do with whatever extremist radicalization, whatever, that they have been accused of having been kind of derailed into. It all occurred because of the absence of the democratic and campaigning spirit and environment in the Bangladeshi community, and especially among those who took advantage of the awareness of the Bangladeshi community's rights, which awareness followed, which acceptance of the rights followed the campaign. I'm the only one who didn't become a councillor or MP or whatever, but I have been doing the most work. Evidence shows. If anyone denies that, fine, let them show the alternative assessment and statement, alternative to what I've just said. If anyone else or someone else has been doing the main work or more work than I have been doing, let them be identified, or let them identify themselves by citing chapter and verse of the work that they've been doing. And I say work, although it's campaigning, but it's work that is more rigorous, more demanding in every sense, and of a much higher level than the work that has been done for the same purpose by all the licensed law traders, genuine or fraudulent, that have been doing business at the expense of the Bangladeshi community, Saint our Hamlers. All the licensed law traders, soul cheaters and solicitors. Soul cheaters are the brazen crooks and liars among them, and solicitors who are not detected as being as corrupt as the others. Let them come out and say about one single court case they have done from A to Z, pro bono, that is to say, without seeking to be paid for it. And as compared with the literally hundreds of legal action that I have taken without seeking or getting a single penny, but spending my own time, my own money, my own resources, and my own abilities. So, the reason why Shamima Begum and three of our friends were condemned to that state to be destroyed, their lives have been destroyed now. I've said before, would an ordinary Bangladeshi parent or guardian or an uncle or a kind of older brother, would they actually think that their sister or their daughter or their niece, any of those girls, deserve to be condemned like that? Would they accept that? Because I think, in my language, what has happened to these girls, these four girls, forget about the court cases and all the rest of it. These girls, imagine, these girls have been hijacked or kidnapped by still unknown hijackers or kidnappers. Would society ignore even one girl being kidnapped? And would society be as hostile to the victim of the kidnapping as they have been to these girls? This is a humanization of the situation. I'm asking this question. Would a girl, 15, 14, whatever the age of the first one was, being kidnapped, gone missing, would she be the target of condemnation? Because I don't know who these people were that got these girls to decide to leave the UK and go to Turkey and go to Syria through Turkey, whatever. I don't know them. I never knew them. I don't have any clue as to who these people were. And nobody has offered me any information about any of that. So I'm completely unaware of the events. But I am fully aware of the repercussions, the impact and the implications, the message, which is this: if these girls, either individually or collectively, went missing and reports to the police were made and they still didn't come, they weren't found, there would be an absolute international outrage about those girls being found to be missing, gone missing, and their bodies not found, nothing was found. So there would be outrage, and rightly so. I am outraged by the fact that the mullahs in the mosques, the councillors in the council, and the two mayors in post, they have completely stayed silent. And they're still silent. It's not good enough, and it's not enough to just mention that Shamima Begum has lost the case. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Shamima Begum having been kidnapped and not found. Would these people, all of them, be behaving as if they have never heard of Shamima Begum, which is what they're doing? As if they have never heard of the three other girls that have been reported missing. In my updated vocabulary and in my updated phrasing and narrative and commentary, they wouldn't. All kinds of people would do all kinds of things, tokenistic or genuine, in order to be seen to be doing something to find these girls gone missing. So why have the so-called Bangladeshi community, so-called leaders, mullahs and others, why have they been silent? What does it show about their humanity, their compassion? These people are not racist. They are not murderers like the murderers of Tosir Ali, Altab Ali, Ishaq Ali, and other victims of racist murders and violence. What is their excuse? I speak from experience, very, very detailed experience. 2 years before Altab Ali was murdered, the Metropolitan Police set up a thing called Police Community Liaison meetings. And these events were held at the then Lehman Street police station. And Chief Inspector of the Metropolitan Police chaired the meeting. It was like something that I had not experienced previous to that. But it felt like being treated into one of the British imperialists kind of police-led events. This guy would chair the meeting, but he would not observe any of the laws of meetings or rules of meeting. He would lecture the people present there, and it was nothing to do with the open exchange of information, let alone sharing of thoughts and concerns. Chief Inspector John Wallis was the one that did that for, I think, not looking at the kind of archives and the records that are not in front of me. So I think it was about 18 months. And John Wallis behaved in accordance with the assumption of racist superiority. He talked down to all the people present. And I was the only one that was outraged internally, but not expressing any of my outrage because none of the others would share my outrage at all. They were quite happy to be there at all. Remember what I'm saying? These are Bangladeshi people. If there were some Asian, Pakistani or Indian, I cannot remember, but it was mainly done for the Bangladeshi community. Now that was done 2 years before Altab Ali was murdered by racists, not far from the Lehman Street police station. So I'm remembering events from the 70s without notes. And John Wallis talked down to the gathering. And my general ordinary kind of reflex expectation did occur that might be somebody else would notice how outrageous these exchanges were and how totally unfit John Wallis was in talking down to the people at a gathering that was organized by the police under the banner of police community liaison. And notice the order, not community and police liaison, but it was police community liaison meeting. And liaison is a word that stinks of corruption, of secrecy, and creepy connections. And for 18 months or so, in my recollection, I put up with this, not because I had to, but I put up with this simply and totally, absolutely, essentially for gathering evidence. That was the evidence. That although it was called a liaison, that is to say, kind of reassuring the community, and I'll come to why the police bothered to organize that in the first place. That was, remember, 2 years before Altaf Ali was murdered by racists. So in the years, let's say 3 or 4 years before this thing was set up, no fatal attack by racists took place against the local Bangladeshis or other members of the Asian subcontinent. Because Tar Hamlas has, of course, other people of other backgrounds like India and Pakistan, but the numerical majority has been the Bangladeshis, and therefore the actual numbers of targets of attacks have been more Bangladeshis than other Asians. If other Asians were at all resident and were out in the street on their own at the time, 1975, 76. The reason why they did that was because those of us who campaigned, had found that the police were not responding to reports or calls for help after being attacked by racists, either verbally or physically. And the situation in the Brick Lane area, for example, kind of gave an accurate picture of what was going on. Brick Lane has got side streets. Let's say one of them is Hanbury Street, and the next one to the south is Prince Laird Street. And the local area had two venues for public meetings, public gatherings. One was the Toynbee Hall at 28 Commercial Street, and the other is the Montefiore Centre in the Hanbury Street, which is not far from where the Brady Centre is now. But the Brady Centre wasn't known for gatherings in those days anyway. And the Montefiore Centre and the Toynbee Hall were the only two that had the space and the accessibility for most Bangladeshis in the area, immediate area, to attend or travel to. So when people were going either to the meeting at the Montefiore Centre or returning from a meeting at the Montefiore Centre, they would walk through Prince Laird Street and they would walk through Hanbury Street. And So many times they would be accosted by racists who would spit on them. These are men, Bangladeshi men, walking either to the meeting or from the meeting, and they would be spat at. And almost always the people put up with this and they didn't retaliate. Because most of the times the attackers were younger than the victims and also stronger on the whole. So these events would be reported internally to the likes of me, not necessarily only to me, but to the likes of me. That is to say, somebody who would then try to contact the police and ask them to take action or words to that effect. And too many of such incidents were taking place. And too many times we had to kind of make the calls, but also conclude that the police aren't going to do anything. That is what was happening. And this eventually reached the Metropolitan Police HQ, who decided to mount a propaganda, publicity kind of exercise. So the police community liaison meetings were not intended as police doing the service to the community, but police trying to deflect attention from too many accurate reports of police failing or choosing to fail to protect the victims of racist attacks in the streets. Remember what years I'm talking about. So I'm talking about 1970, mid 1970s. So mid 1970s, mid 1980s, 90s, 2000s. It's 4 decades, 40 years ago, let's say. And here is the Daily Mail today, Monday, the 1st of March 2021, which is claiming that in the last 10 years, what is the So the half of the police stations that the Daily Mail says have been closed in the last 10 years. This is completely misleading and false because it says, the Daily Mail, that at least 667 stations with front counters allowing the public to talk to officers have been shut down since 2010 in drastic cost-cutting measures. The Daily Mail is lying when it says that front counters allowed the public to talk to officers. That is an absolute lie. The police stations in this country have not been like coffee shops. Police stations in this country have always been absolutely obstructive to the public having access. And police stations in Brick Lane or police stations in the east end of London have been more obstructive than many others. So even if they close the stations, they haven't added any dimension that would otherwise apply to the keeping open of the facility and closing it down. And this is what actually is the evidence. It is not something I'm making up. For many years, the little police station in Brick Lane has existed. But if you go there is nobody at the counter to take the details down. And if they pretend to take the details down, they don't take any action. I tried several times, and it didn't produce any difference. And it's not something that they were doing just in response to my particular kind of contacts. And again, there has been no communication, publicly or otherwise, by the councils and the councillors about this literally deadly silence and contradiction and insult. Why they have had the so-called police station in Brick Lane is never made clear. But no councillor, no member of parliament, and no mayor has made any issue on the basis of the fact that the police have not been doing their job. So the Daily Mail is lying, not for the first time, of course. And what we are saying about the police in relation to Shamima Begum is this, that although the police are not required under the kind of known settlement, and I'm saying it advisedly, settlement, and I'm saying this as part of the analysis and the assertion that the police are not accountable even under the law. Police are allowed to behave as they wish. Even the Home Office is not responsible for accounting to the public for the police. So, when Shamima Begum went missing, let's change the narrative, the wording, so that it becomes accessible. When Shamima Begum and two of our friends went missing in February 2015, what did the police do? Of course, they didn't go missing, literally. They went to Syria. But assume that they had gone missing. What did the police do? What would the police do? Or what should the police have done? They should have mounted searches. But did they? And if they didn't, who is going to account for the absence of action by the police after these girls were found to have been in Syria or Syrian territory? Because they were minors, they were not adults, and they had no reason to be going off to another country. They were schoolgirls. Because if those girls were reported missing, then the police would be doing searches, as I said before, involving the participation of thousands of people, including members of the public. No such activity took place. Everyone assumed everyone assumed, including all the Bangladeshi community, as far as I know, that these girls must have done something wrong automatically. And none of the so-called ethnicity-linked media outlets operated for the benefit of the crooks that run those, made a squeak. They didn't speak objectively as they should have done. They didn't say how terrible that these children have gone missing. Somebody has kidnapped them. Because what has happened to these girls, the 4 girls altogether, is that they have been kidnapped. And they're still in that state. If the first one is still alive, I don't have the latest information about the first one's fate. But I know that two of the girls that went with Shamima Begum have died in various kind of circumstances. The girls are missing and the community is silent. Nobody is talking about anything to do with them. So these girls were abandoned when they needed the community to stand up for them. So I'm asking this. What do you think? Anyone watching this? Of course, our program is not watched by thousands because we don't carry thousands of followers. We reject followers and we don't follow people, except 1 or 2 that have been still on the list from some time ago. We publish, and people who want to view this will find this. As simple as that. Now, what do you think should have happened to Shamima Begum when she and her 2 friends together were reported missing? And what is the justification for this community so-called? There goes too many Facebook account holders. They haven't got as many Twitter account holders, but they've got Facebook. And they do the selfies with one another. Really grown men with beard do stupid, childish, infantile, narcissistic things. Every single time they do something, they put forward their photographs or photographs of somebody they're kind of standing near or next to. Most often it is one counselor doing the promoting with another counselor, or one wannabe counselor doing the promoting with the people that they think can make a difference for them, make it happen for them, and they can get on the list of being a counselor. That's the maximum they can do. That's the maximum these people are doing. That's the maximum that they're predisposed to be rushing to be doing. And it's shameless. It is not only shameless, it's disgraceful, lack of showing any concern for the victims of hijacking or kidnapping. I mean, for understanding, I'm using the term kidnapping and hijacking, and I qualify that. And contextually, I'm never saying that they were literally kidnapped, but that's the easiest way to understand the plight of these girls. I'm also saying that Shamima Begum was not born, and most certainly, as far as I can see, not brought up to behave as a terrorist or radical or as an unkind person. So if she wasn't born a radical, born a terrorist, or born an unkind person, or raised as an unkind person, how come that there is no sympathy for her? What evidence has anyone inside the Bangladeshi community have against Shamima Begum? and her friends. What evidence? Now, that school that they called Bethnal Green School at the time had been known for very long time as the Dainford School. It was, as Dainford School, it was a single-sex, boys-only school. So therefore, there was no girls, there were no girls, no Shamima Begum or any of the others. It was only boys. And for most of its life, the Dainford School was a school that was used by mainly Jewish people, Jewish boys. And there was no sign of any radicalism or whatever. But what is even more important was that left to their own kind of sex or gender, the boys did much better than Shamima Begum and others turned out to be doing in the mixed setting. My work as an organizer and a trainer of school governors was created by me in anticipation of many problems, that badly governed and badly run school would cause to the pupils. I remain convinced that that is true even now. I first began getting involved in school governance in the 80s because I wanted to create the atmosphere in Tower Hamlets, in fact, in the Inner London Education Authority itself, for parents and guardians of children to feel welcome as contributors to the ideas that best suited their children. So I took the initiative, late 1970s and early 1980s, to get the Inner London Education Authority to invite ordinary members of the community, especially parents or guardians of children attending the ILES schools, to apply for and become governors. Now, there is a long story about the various stages that I had to go through before the ILEA began to do what I was asking it to do. And the purpose was to make the parents and the guardians aware of what was actually going on, if not on day-to-day, but more closely than they would have been without being involved as governors. And I knew that the schools in Tower Hamlets, in Inner London itself, the other 9 boroughs, were hostile and were racist against the children of African, Caribbean, and Asian backgrounds. So the future of the community was at stake. And I knew that unless the children were able to acquire the schooling that enabled them to go to the next stages, their future was doomed. And that has happened to too many of the children of the Bangladeshi community and Pakistani community in other boroughs like Newham. So when Shamima Begum went missing, let's say in Tower Hamlets, what did the Tower Hamlets Council do? Answer, nothing. And that is why it is more than abundantly clear as to how important campaign is. It's not just a side issue. campaigning for direct participation by parents and guardians in the schools ranks as being above the quality of being a teacher or head teacher. And it is now 5 years, 6 calendar years, since Shamima Begum was kidnapped. And there is no sign, apart from this campaign, that anyone is even now bothered about standing up or speaking up about the issue, let alone speaking up for the children, including Shamima Begum. So, when we shall be looking at the events of 1978 and what has happened since then, we shall be asking those who were present to give their opinion as to what they think has happened, what they think has gone wrong, what they think has gone right, and we shall be publishing that in a series and as part of the Khoodeelaar television channel.